Hi, my name is Juhie and I am from Data School Cohort 26, which is a part of the Information Lab UK. Today I'm going to be showing you how to build a color contrast diverging bar chart. Diverging bar charts are a good way of visualizing comparative data. You might be familiar with seeing diverging bar charts comparing the numbers of males and females in each age group, which can also be called a population pyramid. A good business use case for such charts would be looking at the number of males and females in two departments, or comparing the costs of different products from two different suppliers. Today, we will be building a diverging bar chart using the sample superstore dataset, comparing the current and previous year sales. So let's get started. So on the screen at the moment is the diverging bar chart with contrasting background that we are going to be making. As you can see, we have one bar for each of our different subcategories, with the current year sales on the right-hand side and the previous year sales on the left-hand side. So like I said, we will be using the sample superstore dataset in order to make this visualization. So I'll just briefly take you through the dataset now. But you can see that we just have transactional sales data. So we have one row for each of our different orders, and we have the sales value for each of them. We also have the order date field as well, which tells us when each order occurred. So in order to create our diverging bar chart, we need to create calculations to get the current year and the previous year sales. So I have made these calculations ahead of time, so I will just take you through them now. Starting off with the current year sales. So you can see that the current year sales calculation is just an if statement, and I'll take you through this now piece by piece. So year order date. Our order date field tells us when each order occurred. And from this highlighted section, we just want to pull out the year of that date. So for example, if an order occurred on the 1st of February 2022, the output of this highlighted section would just be 2022, so the year of that date. The max order date section here, we just want to know what is the most recent date in our data set, so the maximum date. And we just want to pull out the year of that date. So overall, we're saying if the most recent year, the current year, is the same as the year part of our order date, then give me the sales value for my current year. The same logic is then applied to the previous year's sales calculation. So if I just show you that as well, you can see the if statement is very similar. The only main difference being is that we have subtracted 1 from the maximum year in order to get the previous year. So now let's build our chart. To build a diverging bar chart, first of all, you need at least 2 measures. So those are any of the fields that are below the grey line in your data pane. And you need at least 1 dimension, so any of the fields that are above the grey line. So I'm going to drag previous year sales onto columns, and then current year sales onto columns just next to it. So at the moment, we just have 2 bars, one for the total previous year sales, all aggregated together to 1 bar, and just again 1 bar for the current year sales, so the total amount. But I want to have 1 bar for each of my different subcategories, so I'm going to drag subcategory on 2 rows. At the moment, we just have 2 separate bar charts, but of course we want to create a diverging bar chart. To do this, I'm going to right-click on the previous year sales axis, edit axis, and then just check the reversed box. And if I exit the pane, you can now see that we have created our diverging bar chart. If we look back at the chart that I made earlier, you can see that we have our subcategory names in the middle of each of our bars. In order to do this, we have to create our diverging bar chart slightly differently. So I'm just going to put the axis back to as it was before. So now I'm going to head back into the previous year's sales calculation and just put a minus sign in front of the sales so I get the negative values for each of my sales, and thus when I click OK, you can see my axis has now been reversed. So first of all, we have to create a shared axis with our current and previous year's sales fields. So I'm going to now drag the current year's sales pill on top of the previous year's sales axis, thus creating the shared axis where you can see now we have both bars are plotted on one axis. But you can see at the moment we have a separate bar for our previous year's sales and our current year sales. We just want to have one diverging bar. So I'm just going to take off measure names from the rows shelf, and you can now see we have our diverging bar with previous year sales on the left and our current year sales on the right. So the measure names field was automatically added in when I created my shared axis. So now we have our diverging bar chart. So to get the subcategory names in the middle of each of my bars, I can now create a calculation in the columns shelf. So if I double click, I can now create a calculation, and I'm just going to write AVG 0. And you can now see this extra chart has been created for me on the right-hand side. I now want to create a dual axis so I can have my AVG 0 axis overlaid on top of the sales axis. To do this, I'm going to right-click and then select the dual axis option. And you can now see we have both of our charts now put together into one. But you can also see as well at the moment that our axes aren't lining up. So our AVG0 value is not lining up to the 0 value of our sales axis. So I now have to synchronize my axes together. To do this, I'm going to right-click on the axis and then select the Synchronize Axes option. And you can now see those 0 values are now aligned. So now we're going to change our mark types. We want our sales, so our previous and current year sales, which is our measure values field, to have a bar mark type. So I'm going to change that to bar. And we want our AVG0 marks card to have a text mark type, as that's going to have our subcategory names on. I will now just take off measure names from color and drag subcategory on to text. And you can now see we have our subcategory names in the middle of each of our diverging bars. I'm now just going to format the text to make the labels look a little bit nicer. To do that, I'm going to click on the text icon and those 3 dots and just format my text. So you can see at the moment that we have 2 axes. We have the value axis at the bottom and we have AVG0 at the top. We just need one axis, so I will just remove the top axis by right-clicking and unticking the Show Header option. Since we have our subcategory labels in the middle of each of our diverging bars, we don't need the axis on the left-hand side. So again, I'll also remove that by right-clicking on it and unticking Show Header. So when making a diverging bar chart, it's important that the axis ranges on either side are exactly the same so that you can make fair comparisons across the bars. So for example, you can see at the moment on the right hand side for my current year sales, it ranges from 0 to 110,000. But on the left hand side, it ranges from 0 to minus 90,000. We need these ranges to be exactly the same. Otherwise, it can distort the shape and look of the graph. You can see, for example, for the chairs subcategory, the length of the bars on either side look exactly the same. But if I hover over each bar, you can see the previous year sales for the chairs subcategory was 83,000, but the current year sales are 95,000. So even though the sales values are $10,000 apart, the bars look exactly the same. So to change the axis range, I am going to right click on my value axis and then go to the edit axis option. I will then click on fixed, and the fixed start will now be minus 110,000 and the fixed end will be 110,000. Since I'm here, I can also change the axis title. So you can see at the moment that my axis is called value. I can just change that to sales, as it is of course showing our previous and current sales values. And I'll just come out of that pane, and you can now see our graph has updated. So we have nearly created our diverging bar chart. But you can see on the left-hand side, so where our previous sales are, we have a negative sign in front of our sales values in our axis. And that is, of course, because we put a negative sign in our calculation. But in fact, of course, our sales are positive, so we want to remove this negative sign whilst also keeping our axis reversed. So to do this, I am going to right-click on the sales axis and then go to Format. I'm just going to make sure that I am in the Axis tab at the very top, and then go to Numbers, and then Number Custom. I'm going to make my decimal places 0 first of all, and change the display units to thousands. And lastly, I'll go down to where it says Custom, and just take off the negative sign after the semicolon. And as soon as I do that, you can see those negative signs have now been removed from my axis. And I'll just then exit the formatting pane. So now to create our contrasting color background, to do this, we have to create a reference band with exactly the same range as the left-hand axis. So ranging from 0 to minus 110,000, as we just want the reference band to color this left-hand pane. So to do this, we are going to go into the Analytics tab and then drag a reference band onto the pane pill for measures values. Where it says minimum, I'll change that to constant. And the band is going to start at minus 110,000. And where it says maximum, I'll change that to constant again. And the band will end at the value 0, and therefore only coloring that left-hand pane for my previous sales. I also just want to turn off the labels and the tooltips, and that's just to make sure that the reference band only purely acts as a background. I'm also going to color my reference band to exactly the same color as my current year sales bars by changing that fill color there. And then click OK. And you can now see we have created our diverging bar chart with color contrast. The last few things left to do now is just some formatting. So the first thing I'm going to do is just remove the grid lines that you can see in the background and also the borders you can see around our chart. To do that, I'm going to go into the Format option at the top and then go down to Lines. then to columns, and then just change grid lines to none. And you can now see those grid lines have been removed. To get rid of the borders, I will click on the borders option, go to sheet, and then where it says row divider, I will change that to none and do the same thing for column divider. And again, you can see my graph has now just a blank background behind it and no grid lines or borders. The next thing I want to do as well, if I just exit the formatting pane, I want to add a border to each of my bars. So to do that, I'm going to go into the color icon of my measure values marks card and just add a border. And then I also want to change the color of my previous year sales bars to white. So I'm going to go into edit colors, double click on previous year sales and change that now to white. And you can now see we have created our diverging bar chart with color contrast. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you now feel more confident in building diverging bar charts and also including the color contrast background feature. Please check the description of this video for links to the additional material you might find helpful. If you enjoyed this video, you might enjoy the other videos in our chart building series, so feel free to give them a watch too.